Today, we are going to talk about the Pacific drama. Mainly because I just didn't get to say everything I wanted to say on Plat Chat yesterday, so I thought I'd just make this video. Yes, we will get to Paper X tomorrow as well. I know yesterday I said I'd do a two-part on Paper X, and that will still be coming tomorrow. But let's dive into this drama. For those of you who don't know anything about this, really this drama all started with this moment right here. During the start of the DRX versus Talon game, out come Termi and Frost, and then as they're about to do the fist bump, this happens, where there is no fist bump, and here we go. Now, this video in and of itself, you know, is kind of wild and strange, and this essentially caused a whole lot of drama. But essentially it caused two sort of separate different dramas, because what we're going to get into today is not just this, but also scrim sharing. And people have conflated the two, but really this isn't about scrim sharing, because what people thought this was about scrim sharing is because Frost in the past has previously tweeted about, you know, not DRX specifically, but Korean teams, you know, scrim sharing and stuff like that, and it being a problem. But you can kind of even see in the video that, you know, Frost in a second is going to apologize, you know, to the rest of DRX just there, kind of showing that he's not mad at the team DRX, it's just kind of a him and Termi thing. Now, the drama between him and Termi, you know, has been bubbling up before this, apparently, and we'll get into some of the details. But obviously, this was kind of, you know, the amalgamation of it. I mean, you could see, I mean, Termi there it looks like calls Frost crazy, and there's other parts to it as well, right? So if we come here to kind of the aftermath of this, Frost called Termi a MFer on today's stage. In the post-match media interview, Bjorn said, Coach Frost is playing without discipline that Riot Games taught him, and he called me an expletive with an M and an F on stage. He also said it's not the UFC, so you can't fight back and forth. This is professional sports. I've been tolerating it, but I hope Riot disciplines him for this, he emphasized. Honestly, I think he's crazy. I hope he goes back to his country, the United States. Now, people took kind of, you know, issue with this comment as well, right? In terms of, obviously, this is a translation, so, you know, sort of the tone might have been somewhat lost, but obviously here in English, at least, right, like, saying this kind of thing, it does carry a certain connotation, isn't a great thing to say, which has, you know, led people to potentially believing, you know, that Termi, you know, is xenophobic and stuff like that, and obviously, perhaps it is something that he should not have said. But, as I said, people have been basically conflating the scrim sharing stuff and what is going on here. Now, why Frost is mad at Termi apparently alleges to some other comment that was mistranslated, and, you know, Frost took the wrong way, whatever. Honestly, I don't really care that much about, you know, all the intricate details of why these two don't like each other, because in my opinion, it's perfectly fine for these two to not like each other. Like, if these two don't like each other, that's fine. Now, you could say here for Frost, you know, it's not great to kind of be disrespectful and not do the fist bump, even if you don't like them, right? Like, yeah, you should be more respectful, and yeah, the comments, you know, of saying, you know, calling him an MFer, and, you know, Termi's comment here of this, you know, could definitely be taken in a bad way, and, you know, it's not really a great look for either of the two coaches. I think we can all agree with that. It's kind of like, you know, playground stuff, you know, high school kind of drama stuff, and it's not a great look, but at the end of I don't think it's the end of the world either, right? Like, it's not great. If I was Riot, I'd be like, you know, like you would with like a kid who's too old to be misbehaving. You're like, what are you doing? You know, if I was Riot, that's what I'd do. I would, you know, just tell them to chill out. You know, give them maybe a warning or something. It's not great for either of them, but I don't think that that's the biggest deal. And in fact, I think, you know, the kind of dark side of these kind of things is it actually is kind of possibly positive for the scene, because next time Talon play DRX, you're going to want to watch that game, right? You're going to want to watch the walkouts. You're going to be more invested and more interested in that game than you otherwise would have been before, right? Because Talent DRX, it's like, you know, it's just another game. But now it's not just another game. There is quite seemingly more on the line. And so it actually adds to those kind of storylines. And that's why sometimes, you know, things like this, it's like when people fight in sports and the commentators say, oh, we really don't want to see this. But, you know, really, you actually do want to see it. Everyone at home is going, no, I do want to see that because it's kind of interesting. But now let's move on to the scrim sharing kind of things, which, as I say, really, I think it's two completely separate dramas, but because Frost is kind of involved in both, they've kind of become conflated, but I don't think they're conflated at all. But let's talk about scrim sharing, because that's been coming up a lot recently as well. So, Governor, tweeted this. I have nothing to gain now from saying this, but last year on Talon, we had proof of some teams scrim sharing and showed it, but yeah, Riot didn't really care and told us they couldn't enforce anything from what I understood. Just to shed some light, I don't know what's going on there now and if the problem still exists, but in my experience last year, it was definitely a thing. I do think it should be enforced as a rule, though. And this last part about it being enforced as a rule is that you shouldn't scrim share. I'm sure everyone can get on board with 100%, but this is kind of, you know, again, referring back to last year on Talon. There was some sort of evidence that apparently Talon submitted to Riot about there being scrim sharing, but Riot didn't really do anything about it. And what I want to point out about this is that we don't know, right? Like, for all of what is about to happen and everything I'm about to say and everything that's been said by other people, apart from the people who are actually involved, none of us on the outside have any idea, because no information has been released publicly. It's just, you know, been like, oh, Talon submitted something to Riot. Riot kind of didn't do anything about it. There's, you know, whispers and rumors of scrim sharing and all that, but none of us really know. So whilst it's very possible that scrim sharing has and does happen, we also don't know if it does and who is doing it. Keep that in mind, that we don't have any actual hard evidence. If I had to guess what was truly going on, is that there isn't necessarily hard evidence. Hard evidence of scrim sharing would be, you know, like looking at screenshots of messages of people saying, what comp did this team play on this map? And someone from another team being like, this is what they played, right? That would be hard evidence of scrim sharing. I doubt that Talon have that information, right? What I think is more likely, and this is kind of what was alluded to before by Frost, is that, you know, Talon, who are a team who are known for playing multiple comps on the same map and kind of, you know, picking a comp based on their opponent, and so, you know, keeping it fresh and you know, keeping their opponent on their toes, they would play a certain comp, and then they would play against a certain team, and then that team would have all the right reads on, you know, what they were potentially doing in certain rounds. Right? And that seems suspicious, right? Like, how do you have all these right reads? Has someone been telling you what we've been doing in scrims? The thing is, of course, that isn't hard evidence of scrim sharing, is it? Because it's possible by pot luck, right? Like just random chance, or maybe the other opponent has a very good read on what you're doing, that they just end up in the good setup, right? Like that could also just happen, and it could be a complete fluke and a complete accident, and who knows, right? I'm sure Talon, you know, and the people who are there perhaps feel like, oh no, it was multiple rounds, and you know, there were so many rounds that, you know, it couldn't just be pure chance, but there is always that chance that it was just pure luck, and you know, there was no scrim sharing whatsoever. But Termi also had a statement as well, talking about, you know, the scrim sharing, and he said, to put it clearly, DRX has never leaked any scrims. If anything, we were victims of a scrim leak back in 2021. We consider it to be deeply unprofessional. You know, Coach Frost claims to have evidence, and if it's true, we wanted to clearly state what teams, players, or coaches were involved and publicly release the proof that was submitted to Riot Games. As someone who's been in the esports scene for over 20 years, I will retire tomorrow if there's any credible evidence that states DRX leaked scrim information. But if no such evidence is presented, then I demand Coach Frost to take full responsibility for fueling these baseless rumors. Now, here's the thing about this, right, that I think is interesting as well, that Termi says he'll retire tomorrow if there's any credible evidence that DRX leaked any scrims. But the thing is, Termi might not know if DRX have leaked scrims, right? It doesn't have to officially come from him. Let me give you a scenario, right? Like, let's say that Mako, Stax, and Buzz go out for lunch together, you know, 3 ex-DRX players, now 2 of them are on T1, and Stax asks Mako, hey, how are you doing in scrims? And Mako says, yeah, we're doing pretty well. Oh, are you scrimming against Talon? Oh, yeah, what maps did you play? Oh, yeah, you know, Ascent. Oh, what did they play on Ascent? Oh, they played this comp, right? A little conversation that happens between people that Termi would have no idea if that ever happened. It would be scrim sharing, but it would just be a conversation between friends that would be almost impossible to prove unless you were actually recording it, you know, like the CIA or something, right? But that would be scrim sharing, and so I thought that this was a bit strange that Termi, you know, was like willing to put his career on the line essentially for something that very well may have happened that he just simply didn't know about, right? And that's the thing. And this is the problem from Riot's perspective in terms of maybe the information that was given, you know, from Talon, is these things are very difficult to prove. And you know, that situation that I just outlined, a lot of players from different teams will be friends, right? And is it unreasonable to suggest that those friends might casually let something slip in a conversation with their other friend who's on another team about, you know, how they're doing in scrims that may involve a team that they're about to play? Like, I don't think that's unreasonable to suggest that that could or does happen, right? But also, it's almost impossible to police that as well, and you know, prove without doubt that that is definite scrim sharing and what was actually said in said conversation. And the reaction from some of the Korean players has been, quite big in terms of, reacting out, saying that they don't scrim share, right? Like Texture, was really kind of, putting out there that he's really, not happy. I won't name anyone specific, but I do though see Substance causing so much stress, right? Because of course, saying that people scrim share is essentially saying, you're calling them cheats, and saying, like, oh, you cheated, therefore, you don't deserve maybe some of the success that you've had in the past. That is a pretty big accusation. Overall, none of us know anything, and so all of it is just complete baseless speculation, and it's impossible to take a side on either side of this scrim sharing drama, to be honest. So basically what I'm saying is, don't say anything. We'll get on with our lives. Does scrim sharing happen? Yeah, maybe even probably, right? Is it going to be easy to prove a lot of the time? And is there a lot that Riot is going to be able to do about it a lot of the time? Maybe not. And so that's the world that we live in. Unlucky.